Venezuela. It's a country in turmoil, right? I mean, you've seen the headlines. Everyone knows there's like a huge humanitarian crisis going on there. But today, we're going deeper. We're trying to get past just the headlines and really take a deep dive into what's happening under Nicolás Maduro's regime. Specifically, we're going to be looking at these state-sanctioned crimes. They've become, honestly, terrifyingly common.
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult reality to face. But I think understanding the tactics that are being used to silence dissent can really help us, help us grasp just how serious the situation is for millions of Venezuelans every single day.
And just prepping for this deep dive, just reading through these firsthand accounts, the reports, it's chilling. We're talking about forced disappearances, torture, a whole system that seems like it's designed to instill fear and crush anyone who disagrees. It's a lot. So I guess, where do we even begin? What's the goal here? Why is this happening?
Well, at its core, it's about power. It's as simple and as complicated as that, right?
Yep.
Since Maduro came to power, his regime has been very meticulous. They've meticulously crafted this climate of fear, using violence and intimidation to silence anyone, any voice that even questions or criticizes what's going on. They've created this whole web with paramilitary groups acting as their enforcers and security forces doing their bidding. And it's all with one aim: crushing any dissent before it even has a chance to get started.
So it's about creating this atmosphere, this environment where people are too afraid to even whisper any discontent they might have, let alone organize or protest.
Exactly. And it's most effective when it targets the people who do speak out, the ones who are seen as, potential leaders. Any kind of opposition, like activists, for instance. There are so many stories of activists being abducted, often from their homes, in the dead of night. They're taken to these secret prisons, tortured, and tragically, so many are never seen again.
God, those disappearances, it's not just the victim that suffers, it's the families, right? The families left behind, stuck with this horrifying uncertainty, not knowing, just total grief. It's cruel.
It's incredibly effective, though. Sadly, it silences not only the person who was taken, but also anyone who might follow in their footsteps. There's one case that I think really highlights this. It was a young man, a student activist, and he criticized the government. He criticized their economic policies, and he was dragged from his home in the middle of the night by these masked men. They think it was the intelligence services. And his family, they've spent years searching for him, clinging to hope, but nothing. No one knows what happened to him.
God, that's awful. And that's not just an isolated incident, is it? These tactics, they're part of a bigger pattern, a system specifically made to make people afraid, to instill fear in every single person in Venezuela.
Unfortunately, no, it's not isolated. And you're right, it is a pattern. And it's not just about silencing those prominent voices. It's about making an example out of them, sending a message. Step out of line. And this could be you.
It's that climate of fear, that feeling, that sense of dread. It makes me think about the people who just vanish.
Yeah.
The forced disappearances. It's terrifying.
Yeah, it's tragically, it's a reality for way too many people in Venezuela, and it's not random. These disappearances, they're calculated. The regime, they use it to silence people. Anyone who's been critical of the government, they get detained by security forces, sometimes just right in broad daylight, and poof, gone.
Just gone, huh? No explanation, no trial, no nothing. Their families, God, it's just, how do they even deal with that? That uncertainty, it's just, cruel doesn't even cover it.
It's almost impossible to get any information to. The regime, they control everything. The information, the narrative, everything. Those families, they're left trying to figure it out, hitting dead end after dead end.
Right. That lack of transparency, it's all part of how they keep their power, isn't it?
Absolutely. Control, that's the key.
Yeah.
Control the information, you control everything.
God, that's a chilling thought. But this climate of fear, it goes way beyond just those disappearances, doesn't it? You said earlier it impacts daily life for Venezuelans. What does that actually look like?
Just imagine living in a place where you can't even trust your neighbors. Where saying what you think, what you really believe, it could have horrible consequences. So people, they just don't. It's self-censorship. They're afraid to speak their minds.
So it's like they're being silenced, even if no one's actually physically silencing them.
Right.
Their voices. God, it's like they're being crushed. And for the people who do speak up, who protest, what happens to them?
Yeah, well, think about the protests. Back in 2014 and again in 2017, thousands of Venezuelans, they took to the streets. They were frustrated and they wanted change. They wanted a future.
Yeah.
And the regime, they responded with violence.
I remember those images, seeing them on the news. The security forces, those pro-government armed groups, the collectivos, they were just, they were firing on people, unarmed protesters. It was awful.
It was a major turning point, I think. That's when everyone saw just how brutal they could be. Hundreds of people got hurt, tons were arrested, and, well, people died.
It's just, and even if you weren't out protesting, even if you somehow avoided the violence, there are still those prisons, right? What happens in those places? I think that's got to be the most disturbing part of this whole thing.
The prisons in Venezuela, they're basically synonymous with torture at this point. It's systematic, brutal, and the goal is clear. Break anyone who opposes them.
And we're not talking like bad conditions. This is next level.
It's straight out of a horror movie, honestly.
Yeah.
Electric shocks, beatings, suffocation, sexual violence. It's all on the table. And this isn't, just a few bad apples. This is deliberate. It's their system. They use it to punish people and to get false confessions. The UN, Amnesty International, they've all got these reports. Horrific.
It's heartbreaking. And it seems like every time we think we've hit the bottom, there's always something worse. We keep talking about these collectivos, these armed groups. Can you tell us more about them? Like, who are they? Where did they even come from?
So basically, they're paramilitary groups, and they can do whatever they want. No consequences. They first popped up back in the early 2000s. Back then, they were like community groups, defending the revolution.
Yeah.
But that changed fast.
So now they're like the muscle, the regime's enforcers.
Exactly. They silence dissent, intimidate communities, carry out violence that Maduro and the rest can just, well, they can pretend it wasn't them. They're a constant threat.
God. It's like living under this like permanent shadow of fear. You never know when or where they might just, and it's not just like political people, it's everyone, families, communities, everyone's terrified. It's just,
Wow.
It's a lot, It makes you wonder, like, is there any light at the end of the tunnel? Is there any hope for things to get better, for people to be held accountable?
Well, it's a long road, that's for sure. But there are people who are trying. The international community, they're starting to pay attention. More and more countries are condemning what's happening. There are sanctions now on Maduro and his people.
Oh, yeah, the sanctions, those are supposed to hit them where it hurts, right?
Yeah.
Financially. But do they actually work?
That's what everyone wants to know, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's hard to say for sure how much impact they have, but I mean, it sends a message, right? The world is watching, and there are consequences. And it's not just about the money. The UN, they've been doing really important work, documenting everything, giving a voice to the people who've been silenced.
So there's actual proof of what's happening.
Exactly. They've done these in-depth investigations, and they've got the evidence. They've got the reports.
And they can use that to, actually hold people accountable.
That's the idea. And the International Criminal Court, they're investigating now, too, looking into crimes against humanity. That's huge.
So maybe, just maybe, there's a chance that the people behind this, they'll have to answer for what they've done.
It's a possibility. Yeah. And I think it's a testament to the Venezuelan people. They're the ones who've been through hell, and they're still fighting.
God, it's tough to hear about all this and not feel totally overwhelmed. Like, what can anyone even do?
Don't forget about Venezuela. That's the biggest thing. Talk about it. Read about it. Learn what's happening. There are organizations doing good work there, too. Support them if you can. Every little bit matters.
This whole thing has been really heavy, honestly, but we have to talk about it, right? So, listener, if you're out there and you're listening, just remember, this isn't over, not even close. Keep learning, keep talking about it, and don't underestimate yourself. You have a voice, and it matters.